I have watched several women in my neighborhood decline significantly within the space of a year or two. And in almost every case, I saw it coming before most other people did. Not because I have any medical expertise, because I do not, but because I have lived in this neighborhood for more than 30 years, and I have paid close attention to the people around me in the way that a librarian learns to pay attention to the people in her building, quietly, without intruding, noticing patterns and changes that other people walk past. What I noticed in each case was not a health crisis that came out of nowhere. What I noticed was a cluster of small changes, weeks or months before the visible decline, that in hindsight were as clear as a direction. A woman who stopped walking in the mornings, a neighbor whose curtains stayed closed later than usual, someone whose garden, which had been her visible signature for 20 years, began to look tended rather than tended with love. These were not medical symptoms, but they were signs of something shifting, and the shift preceded the decline. I want to talk about what causes this from my own observation and experience rather than from any authority I do not have. Because I think the medical conversation about sudden decline in otherwise healthy older adults tends to focus on the mechanisms of the body while missing the conditions that allowed the decline to happen. The body was receiving messages long before it failed. The question is what those messages were and where they came from. I should say before I go further that this is not a conversation about blame. None of what I am going to describe is the fault of the person who experienced it. These are things that happen to people who are doing their best in circumstances that are genuinely difficult. What I am offering is not a judgment. It is a description, as honest as I can make it, of what I have seen. Leave a comment below if any of this reflects something you have observed in yourself or in someone near you. The first and most significant cause in my observation is the loss of daily structure after a major transition. Retirement, the death of a spouse, the final departure of children, the loss of a role that organized the days. Any of these can remove the scaffolding that was quietly holding a person's life in its shape, often without either the person or the people around them understanding how much of the life shape was actually the scaffolding. And when the scaffolding goes, the shape begins to change. I have seen this pattern clearly enough times to trust it. A woman who worked until 68 and then retired found that the days, which she had expected to feel like freedom, instead felt formless in a way that was disorienting and then exhausting. She was healthy. She had no medical conditions that anyone was concerned about. But within 18 months, she had lost weight she had not intended to lose and was less engaged with the world than she had been in any previous decade of her adult life. The structure had not been a burden. It had been, in ways she had never examined, a form of life support. When the meals had to be at a certain time because of work, she ate regularly. When the days had no such requirement, the meals became irregular and then infrequent. The body followed where the structure led, or where it no longer led. The second cause is social disconnection. And I want to be precise about what I mean by this, because I think the word disconnection is sometimes used too loosely. I do not mean simply living alone, because many women who live alone are thoroughly and actively connected to the world around them. What I mean is the gradual reduction of genuine mutual engagement with other people, the kind of engagement where someone knows your specific situation, asks about the specific things that are happening in your specific life, and expects you to do the same for them in return. That kind of connection requires maintenance, and when it is allowed to lapse, it lapses in a way that is hard to notice from the inside, because the absence of something feels very different from its removal. What I have observed is that the people who decline most rapidly after a major loss are frequently the people whose social life was most tightly coupled with what they lost. A woman whose social world revolved around her husband's work connections found after his death that most of those connections gently retreated, and she had not independently maintained enough of her own. Not because she was passive or dependent in any simple sense, but because the particular configuration of her social life had been assembled around a structure that no longer existed. Rebuilding a social life after 60 takes deliberate effort of a kind that is harder to summon when you are already grieving. If you enjoy this channel and want to support my work, just look directly below the video player, right next to the subscribe button, and click the button that says Join. That is how you become a Smart Organizer. Smart Organizers members get exclusive videos, a loyalty badge in the comments, and custom channel emojis. I would love to have you there. The third cause is the gradual abandonment of the small physical habits that constitute what I would call daily embodied life. Cooking, walking, tending the house, getting up and down from chairs and floors without assistance, carrying groceries, gardening. These are not exercise regimens. They are simply what an active daily life requires of the body, and their cumulative demand is considerable. When they are replaced, one by more passive alternatives, sitting rather than walking, ordering rather than cooking, hiring rather than doing, the body receives less and less of what it was built to do, and it responds accordingly. The insidious quality of this cause is that each individual's substitution seems entirely reasonable. Your back hurts, so you take the elevator instead of the stairs. It is raining, so you do not walk today. And then the habit of not walking outlasts the rain. You are tired, so you have something simple from a package rather than cooking. And then the cooking becomes the exception rather than the default. None of these individual decisions is catastrophic, but the direction they establish is, and the direction is often invisible until the cumulative loss of physical engagement has become significant enough to be noticed by someone outside the situation. The fourth cause is grief that has not been named or processed. I want to be careful about this one because grief is a large word that is often used in large ways, and I am using it in a more specific way. What I have observed is that older women who have accumulated significant losses, not just of people, but of roles, of capacities, of the version of the future they expected, sometimes carry a weight of unprocessed sorrow that they have never fully acknowledged, either because the culture around them did not invite that acknowledgement, or because they themselves did not know quite how to do it, or even that it needed doing. This accumulated grief does not disappear by being ignored. It tends to express itself in the body and in the quality of engagement with daily life. A persistent low energy, a reduced appetite, a flattening of the interest and pleasure that was previously available. These are recognized in the clinical literature as symptoms of depression And sometimes that is the right framing. But sometimes what is happening is simpler and more specific. A person is carrying a weight of genuine sorrow that has not been tended, and the weight is affecting her capacity to invest in the present, because the present keeps asking her to engage with a world that no longer contains the things she most loved about it. If you are not yet subscribed to this channel, I would love to have you here. I post regularly on topics exactly like this one, and the subscribe button is just below. Tell me in the comments if you have observed this pattern in someone close to you or in your own life. I find that the people who have seen it tend to have very specific and illuminating things to say about when and how it began, and that specificity is useful. The fifth cause is the cessation of learning and curiosity. When someone stops being interested in new things, genuinely interested in the sense of wanting to understand something they do not yet understand, a particular quality of forward orientation disappears from their life. The days become about maintenance rather than discovery. The future shrinks to the near and the familiar. The conversations become about what has already happened rather than about what might. I do not know how to measure the effect of this on the body, but I have observed its effect on the quality of life clearly enough that I consider it a real and significant factor in whether a person is thriving or contracting. I have my own version of this in a minor key. There was a period in my late 60s when a family difficulty that I will not describe in detail required more from me emotionally and practically than I had to give. And I watched my curiosity about things outside that situation simply go flat. Books I had been excited to read sat on the table unread. Projects I had been looking forward to stayed unstarted. The part of me that was interested in what was not immediately urgent went quiet. And I noticed it clearly enough to find it alarming, which I think was useful, because the alarm told me it was happening before the flatness could become the new normal. When the situation resolved, the curiosity returned. But the experience gave me a very concrete understanding of how quickly that particular light can dim. The sixth cause is a specific health event that removes confidence more than capability. A fall, a hospitalization, a period of illness from which the person recovers, but which leaves a residual fear that was not present before. This fear is real and it is reasonable, but it tends to produce a contraction of activity that exceeds what the actual recovery requires. A woman who fell once in the garden begins to avoid the garden. A woman who had a brief hospitalization begins to avoid the activities that she fears might lead to another one. The caution expands to fill more and more of the available space, and the life behind the caution shrinks accordingly. The body was recovering. The life was not given the same opportunity. The seventh cause, and the one I think about most carefully because I live with it myself, is the absence of someone who notices. Living alone after 60 means that the small daily changes in how you are doing go largely unmonitored except by yourself, and you are the least reliable monitor of your own gradual deterioration, precisely because you are inside it. A gradual decline feels from the inside like a new normal rather than a change. The curtains staying closed a little later each morning feel, from the inside, like a small adjustment to a slightly later morning routine. From the outside, to someone paying attention, they are a sign. What this means practically is that the women I have watched decline most rapidly were frequently the ones who were most thoroughly alone in a specific sense. Not lonely necessarily, because loneliness and aloneness are different things, but lacking a person who knew them well enough and was present enough and was paying attention in the particular way that allows someone to say, "Something is changing. I know it because I know you. Are you all right?" That question, asked by the right person, can interrupt the direction of things. Its absence is more consequential than most people understand. The practical consequence of this seventh cause is something I think about in relation to my own life. I live alone. My son Daniel is 2 states away. My nearest neighbor is close enough that we have an unspoken agreement of sorts. If the curtains are still closed at a certain hour, or if neither of us has seen the other for more than a couple of days without any word, we check. It is not a formal system. It is not written down anywhere, but it is real, and I consider it one of the more important features of my current life. Because the person who can say something is changing is often the most important person in the situation, and that person needs to exist and needs to be paying attention. What I want to leave you with is this. The decline I am describing is not inevitable, and it is not, for the most part, primarily a medical event. It is a life event that expresses itself in the body. The conditions that allow it to happen are conditions that can, in many cases, be changed. Structure can be rebuilt. Connections can be tended. Physical habits can be maintained and recovered. Grief can be named. Curiosity can be deliberately protected. The confidence lost to a health event can, with enough patience and enough support, be partly restored. None of this is easy, but it is possible in a way that becomes much less possible once the decline is well underway, which is why I think it matters to name these causes clearly while there is still room to respond to them. I want to say something to the people who are watching this, not for themselves, but for someone they love. If you have recognized the early pattern of what I have described in a parent, a friend, or a neighbor, the most valuable thing you can offer is not advice and not intervention. It is presence and attention. The question asked with genuine interest, how are you actually doing right now? Not in general, but specifically, this week, today. Asked repeatedly, over time, by someone who will notice when the answer changes. That is the thing that I have seen from my own observation over many years consistently make a difference in how the story goes. If any of what I have described feels relevant to where you are right now, I hope you will allow it to be useful rather than alarming. Information about what is happening is not the same as a verdict about what will happen. The direction can change. Tell me in the comments what you have found most useful to protect in your own life against the kind of contraction I have described. What have you held on to deliberately, and what has helped you hold on to it?